2014 Town Administrator Bylaw Committee. Before we take comments from members of the public, I would like to make some opening remarks. The Town Administrator Bylaw Committee was established by our Board of Selectmen. Members of the committee are, to my immediate left, Karen Johnson, appointed by the Chair of the Advisory Committee. To my far left, David Pace, Chair of the Personnel Board. And to my right, Tom Carey, and me, Nelson Ross. Our role, when we have completed our process, is to propose a bylaw which sets forth the responsibilities and authority of the position of Town Administrator in Hingham. To date, we have held 5 meetings. We have interviewed all 3 current members of the Board of Selectmen, the current Town Administrator, 2 former Selectmen, our town's first Town Administrator, who served the town for 16 years, the former consultant to the Town Administrator Screening Committee, who was also a town manager in several communities, the current chair of our advisory committee, and a number of department heads. Later this evening, we will be speaking with the chair and a member of the most recent government study committee. But the main purpose of our meeting this evening is to hear from you on this important issue of local governance. In addition to talking with folks knowledgeable about the town administrator position, we have gathered bylaws, charters, and special acts creating town administrators and town managers and pertinent documents relative to the position of town administrator in Hingham and other towns to get a sense of standards and best practices from comparable communities around the Commonwealth. For our meeting tonight, as is the case at town meeting, no speaker is allowed to indulge in personalities. What would be most helpful to us and pertinent to our job would be citizen comments regarding what the role, responsibilities, and authority of the position of town administrator in Hingham should be in the immediate and foreseeable future. It is the position we are interested in, not the incumbent in the position. Nor would we find it pertinent to receive comments on incumbent selectmen. Town administrators and selectmen change. The position of town administrator will continue. We will limit each speaker to 5 minutes. I will let speakers know when they have 1 minute remaining. Finally, we ask that each speaker wait to be recognized by me, come to the microphone, and state her or his name at the outset of their remarks. We want to thank you for taking time to join us tonight, and to those watching at home, thanks for tuning in. The 5-minute limit, if there is a need for additional time, I'm going to reserve the right to be a little flexible because we do want the information. With that having been said, is there anyone who would like to speak? Mr. Rebuffo? Certainly.
You can stand or sit as you see fit.
Whatever you'd prefer.
Whatever you're comfortable with.
I'm more used to this position. Bruce Rebuffo, 1 Dwiggins Path, former member of the Board of Selectmen. In giving some thought to the task here at hand, and I had the opportunity to work with, in an elected capacity, I worked with 2 town administrators and learned from both. And I also had the privilege in a voluntary capacity to work for the town administrator you have already spoken with, Charlie Costello. The one, if I said that there was one word that came out in those discussions, the word was collaboration. That the ability of the board itself, coupled with the town administrator's role, a collaborative approach was one that I felt was most important. That meant that communications, which I know Charlie mentioned in his prior discussion, was obviously most important. And being able to have a discussion among the three selectmen with the town administrator on important subjects, and to be able to have the town administrator do the research if there were, in fact, differing opinions among the selectmen. In terms of his other authority, I would say, from a management point of view, it made sense for the Board of Selectmen to develop policy positions, and for the town and to have a management influence in terms of the selection of the department heads. Below that position, unless civil service law dictated otherwise, I would leave the selection of employees to the town administrator. And the reason I say that is, as the town becomes more complex and growing in size, it becomes important that we have people who would volunteer to step forward to be a selectman. And if we create this job too big for the selectmen by their being involved in day-to-day responsibilities on a regular basis, emphasis on a regular basis, I think that would preclude people from stepping forward to be a selectman. Now, the second part in terms of, so from a disciplinary point of view, certainly the selectmen may have an appeal role to play, and the town administrator, though, should have the authority, in my opinion, to have to final disciplinary authority for all people below the department head, except, again, under this, unless civil service rules would apply. From a financial point of view, the process that I felt worked the best was the interactive role that the selectmen had with the town administrator, and as Mary has referenced, Mary Power, with the advisory committee, because it is a dynamic process, and that interaction is important. But the process that we had in place that I thought worked well was the recommendation from the town administrator and the department heads to the Board of Selectmen, and then obviously ultimate appeal by approval by town meeting. I could go on for a number of other points that I'd be like to, but I think two other issues I'd just like you to consider. One is my research found that any town over 25,000 people did not have our form of government. So that, I'm not saying we should make any changes, obviously, but it would say to me that your work or the work of your successors should be periodically scheduled so that the board gets an opportunity to reflect on the roles and responsibilities that you have. In addition, let me just look at my notes.
We've got about a minute, Bruce, and I'm going to take the clock off. I think we want to hear whatever you have to say.
I won't.
So take your time.
No, Jack Daniels is waiting.
Fair enough. As a former selectman, I think your insights are particularly valuable.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. The other issue I think you're to look at, and maybe it's saying the obvious, the town administrator has a contract. And the contract can be more specific than the bylaw, if that's so appropriate. But the selectmen would make that decision. And then one of the things that troubled me, because I had to live through an issue of performance review with a town administrator, the opportunity for appeal or some other a process, if there was a disagreement between the town administrator and the Board of Selectmen.
Sorry.
That's all right. That's okay. I wasn't sure what I said.
That was serious. You're not paying attention.
That's okay,
Sorry
Nelson.
about that.
Give you a chance to read the minutes.
But I thought that if you had that disagreement, I don't know what the process we would employ. I was fortunate I did not have that, where we had one issue about a disciplinary issue with a former town administrator. It wasn't. It was resolved amicably, and that's fine. But I don't know whether does it require under our current laws to go to town meeting if something became that divisive.
Would you have any thoughts? Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. But.
No, my thought was that could be an appeal process. Town meeting is the ultimate form of government, and if the town administrator felt that he was embarrassed or personally accused, perhaps that would be a way to give them solace. I'd leave it to the lawyers, and there were a number of them here, that to decide as to whether or not that is the right way. It may not be necessary.
May not be the wisest thing to do.
No, but the idea is that
Town meeting meets, the problem presumably is town meeting meets once a year.
That's correct.
It's primarily a legislative body. The thought that one would get into disciplinary matters on the floor is not one I.
Well,
happily
then
entertain.
I would agree with you. If we want, but it's unclear at least in the current bylaw. It's the practice has been. It's been the practice that the Board of Selectmen
Right.
make the unanimous vote, and that's fine. Whether or not a review process with the Personnel Board would be to make sure there were no other violations of rights or other deals might be another approach. But I just thought something to give consideration to, because it is possible that you could have a conflict.
Good suggestion.
That could be. In terms of hiring and firing, we just went through the issue of strong chief, weak chief, and I think the law was pretty clear about that. But again, that's back to my opening comment about collaboration. The fact that I always felt that if I ever had a union grievance, that means management and the union failed. So we had to have we should have a dialogue and a communication that permits upward and downward discussions so that it doesn't get to those points where people are at odds with each other. I think the process that we had in place with the recommendations coming from the department heads through the town administrator worked well. I felt that the interview process that we had where necessary for police, and I would assume under the new bylaw for fire, also worked well, permitting working under the guise of civil service. And
could you tell us what that was? In other words, did under the civil service hiring rules that you were operating under, did you have freedom to pick anyone who had applied, or did you get a report or recommendation?
No, thank you. That's a good question, Tom. Now, I operated with the weak chief being the police chief and the strong chief, the fire chief. The police chief would make a recommendation on candidates that he had interviewed and selected. I never proposed someone to the police chief, and I don't think any of my peers did either. The recommendation then came, and it was in this chair I'm sitting in right now, where the candidate would sit and be interviewed, and then the Board of Selectmen, taking into account the recommendation of the chief, would proceed. And that happens in other capacities as well, where the recommendation was made and then the board followed or disagreed.
Are you talking about positions below the department head?
Yes, under the, and I think that was Tom's question. In the police arena, that's
Outside of the police arena, did the selectmen make the final decision on all hires?
No.
No.
There was the way the process that we employed was a recommendation from the town administrator, more of an informational document that would be left on the selectman's desk for their signature. So you had an opportunity to sign off, but I can't recall a decision in 6 years where we said, no, that candidate is not acceptable.
Okay.
Any other questions?
The relationships with other governmental agencies, state officials, federal officials, other municipalities, regional groups. Could you tell us a little bit about how that was structured and what you would think is an appropriate allocation of authority between or responsibilities between the town administrator and the board or members of the board?
Okay, good. That's another good question, Tom. Back to my original answer, collaboration. One of the experiences I had was, and if I may, I know it's based on experience. We divided up responsibilities among the board members based on their experience. Mm-hmm. So, for example, Laura Burns, I was lucky to have as a peer. Laura had a great deal of interest in school matters and also in housing issues. My expertise, and I use that word very loosely, was in areas of personnel and finance because that was my background. John Riley, when he's here, he was in the areas of construction and those matters. So internally, that's how the work was divided. In terms of relationships with other government entities, I had the honor of having served as an aide in Congress and in the state houses in both New York and Massachusetts, and also to the House of Commons in England. So I had a little political experience as to how matters work. So when governmental issues came up, the town administrator would likely ask me to come along. But it was very important for me not to overstep that relationship. Similarly, in terms of federal interaction, I had an opportunity to interact with both of our congressmen that during my term of office. But again, I had to be very cognizant of the fact that my role, I couldn't commit the town to anything. And I always had to preface my remarks with, I can't commit it because it takes the Board of Selectmen. And that was clear. And one of the issues that has come out periodically is that if a board member makes a decision as to what they would like to pursue and directs a town employee without the concurrence of the other two members of the Board of Selectmen, that could cause difficulty. So it was clear, not that as I mentioned, in the way in one board, the way we differentiated responsibilities, is the other members had the courtesy of saying, I want to go do this, and they'd communicate that through the town administrator to the other members of the board, so that we weren't stepping on toes or overstepping our authority. Again, because of background issues, what I found was if the board members I did testify on behalf of the town at the State House for a number of issues and in court on a number of matters, because that was where my interest or experience was brought forth. But again, it was a collaborative way of getting there, and it was I was very sensitive to the idea, don't overstep my authority, but make sure that my peers were with me so that when I was speaking, they understood. I could say I had the concurrence of my peers.
Bruce?
Did,
Go ahead, Tom.
no, you.
Bruce, I understand that point. Tell us, in terms of the chain of command to the department heads through the town administrator, and where those lines were drawn in terms of the boards that you served on, not going beyond what was appropriate without undermining the town administrator.
Okay. Maybe, and because he's sitting in the audience, the fire chief is here. One of but let's take an emergency situation where the town was, snowfall or some other issue where a responsibility had to be delineated. It was the practice and the understood, not written, that the chairman of the Board of Selectmen would manage those issues in the same way they would manage the board meetings, and would delegate responsibilities to the other board members during those emergencies under the guidance of the Emergency Management Control Center, which in our case was managed by the chief. In terms of process for procurement and for, let's take procurement first. The bylaw delineates, or the practices delineate, the amount of money that the town administrator could secure, and if he exceeded that amount, then he would come to the Board of Selectmen for approval in a public session. If there was a disciplinary issue that came up, the practice was for the town administrator to interact directly with each of the members of the board and let them ask questions, but not to have decisions be made until the public process had happened. So if it required the approval of the Board of Selectmen. I know, did I answer your question, Nelson?
Yeah, I think my main question is, when did selectmen, if at all, go around the town administrator and deal with issues with department heads?
Rarely. That was the sensitivity role. I didn't think, it's like, maybe it's my Army background, but I had a chain of command. I was a drill instructor, and so I knew what responsibilities were. And if it were necessary for me to, let's say a citizen complained about an employee's performance, that's something I'd bring to the town administrator for him to deal with.
For example, that was actually when I was thinking of.
Yeah, I mean, I was very sensitive. And then, of course, the other, as Nelson, as you know better than I, the union contracts, what do we have, 31 of them or some ungodly number? That's the thing, by the way, I should, when you look at the size and scope, how many committees do we have? And, that's and the committees and the union contracts, that becomes critical. The town administrator is better situated to manage those. Selectmen, as you mentioned in your opening comments, come and go. And while they may have an experience in a particular area, they may not understand the practice of how it happens here in Hingham.
But they are, by statute and by various provisions of the town bylaw, the chief executive authority of the town. And what we're going to be struggling with is the fact that in the almost 25 years since Charlie Costello was first hired, I think, with the title of secretary,
Executive Secretary.
We've had town administrators at various times. There have been customs and traditions and understandings. At different times, there have been informal documents drawn up, selectmen's policy about the town administrator, description of the job used in accepting applications from the public to fill the position, and contracts with individuals. But we have never codified as a town how we want to define the role of chief executive in an elected board that presumably one relies on for major policy matters, and then the notion of a town administrator as a chief operating officer, so to speak, dealing with the day-to-day administration of a very complex organization that's got a budget nowadays of something around $100 million. Is it your view that this sort of codification is appropriate after this period of time rather than leaving it to custom and tradition?
I would agree. Based on, again, the research I said earlier about the size of towns and how big do you become, and also, most importantly, getting candidates to want to be members of the Board of Selectmen. But I think you triggered a thought with me. Having served both as a chief operating officer and a chief executive of a subsidiary of the corporation I worked for, one of the practices I was trained by a very wise president who went on to become president of the Bell System, was the concept of management by walking around. So that, when you went into a garage or you went into a field to see what and observe, because the public expects you to understand what's happening, that's okay, and that's a good thing to do. But you have to be careful not to overreach and direct employee in work tasks that you're not knowledgeable about. But always having that second look and another, that made me as a chief operating officer, a chief executive, a better manager because I understood what was happening. My boss one time said, "Bruce, anytime anybody can ask the first question, but when you get the answer to the first question, do you know what's the second question that you should be asking?" So you have to understand that. But you have to be sensitive to the fact that I never embarrassed, I think that's the better word, the person who was taking me around to show me their work operation. That had to be careful. That's why I came back again. The one word that I was, as in thinking about what I would say to you tonight, was collaboration. And there were times, I think, where the town administrator might say, I think I'll take care of that. But he had to feel comfortable being able to tell me, and I had to respect his opportunity to say that. Right. That was unwritten, but understood. And
do you view the town's decision to move from we went away from strong chief in the police force a number of years ago. We had the strong chief in the fire department, and just decided that we'd move away from that. I always had the understanding, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, that part of the thinking behind a strong chief or a strong fire department, both of which have substantial civil service regulation, public safety, professionalism, and the like, was to a degree to insulate the person in charge of delivery of those services from essentially political interference, or interference from those not professionally trained. Correct. Are you aware of whether there has been any sort of classification of town administrator positions, as some communities have a strong town administrator and others have a weak, or is it essentially, historically, one thought of the executive secretary as probably the weakest, town administrator as more authority, and when one got to a town manager or a charter form of government, you got into greater authority. Right. Is that your general understanding? That is my understanding and what I observed. Now I did not serve when Charlie was an executive secretary. But the difference, but again, from the town administrator's point of view, if they're comfortable in their role, they could almost behave like a town manager. And if they had the support of the board, they could. But that's, again, back to the word collaboration. That when I talked with other towns who lived under a town manager role, I felt that the selectmen had little or no authority if the town and manager, under their rules, decided to exercise it. So that's why, again, I come back to when you have a collaborative group of leadership. I'm not advocating what's going on in Beijing at this point, but I think that is the type of skill sets that you want, because you get the benefit of four brains thinking about a particular matter as opposed to just one, and that's a
a team concept approach that
But
works
of
well.
course, you can't write that into a bylaw.
No, you can't. But you could put into the bylaw a collaborative approach to management. I think something like that would decide what kind of person you might want to hire for the various positions going forward. And I think it also helps the Board of Selectmen, because if you come into the job thinking I'll tell you, when I landed in that seat where you're sitting, Karen, and worked my way around the table, I learned an awful lot very quickly, and found that if I wanted to get something done, I had to work with the two peers sitting next to me. And that only happens if you're collaborative, and that in our structure.
Bruce, I want to be sure that we're clear about what you meant when you said that towns with over 25,000 residents don't have our form of government, based on your research and knowledge. What form of government?
I'm talking about an open town meeting.
Okay.
An open town meeting, not a representative
What
town
about
meeting.
city versus town,
Yeah.
or mayor versus manager?
Yeah, I mean,
Those are the kinds of things you're
that's. I mean, open town meeting such as what we have today. Then a representative town meeting, which some towns have migrated to, and then to what Tom just mentioned, a mayor-council kind of approach. The thing that impressed me, and my wife is here, so she'll attest to this, that if you wanted to do this job, this can become a 24/7 job, and you have to protect yourself from that happening. And that's why the work you're doing is important, because you want to attract people who work very difficult jobs to come in and volunteer to be in a policy-making decision.
Any other questions? Karen?
No, that was terrific.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Very,
very
very
helpful,
appreciative of
Bruce.
that.
Okay, well, I admire you taking the time to do this, because there is no straight, easy answer. You're designing behavior, I think, and you can't write that into law, I suspect, but you can certainly encourage it in the words which you're trying to do.
You can encourage it, and you can make an effort. After all, the Massachusetts Constitution, written in 1780 by John Adams, gave judges an enormous amount of power during good behavior.
That's a good prepositional phrase I would encourage you to enforce. Well, thank you for listening to me. I appreciate it. I hope I've been helpful to you.
Very helpful.
Very helpful. Thank you, Bruce.
Good. I have to go see Jack Daniels.
He's looking forward to it.
And we won't put Susan under oath to corroborate you either.
Are there other members of the public who would like to speak? Mrs. English, would you like to speak? Sure, if you would like to speak, we'd love to have you. In my introductory remarks, I said we were going to limit the amount of time, but we're not going to do that. We don't have a huge crowd, so there's no need. So take your time and
Okay, well,
share with
shall I
us.
identify myself?
Yes, that was one of the things I said. We need you to identify yourself and give us your address.
Okay. Are the television cameras on, or?
Yes.
Very good
Dear,
up there.
oh my. Okay, Edna English, 36 Gardner Street. And I represent the old school here, I really do.
Let me just mention one thing for the record. Edna English is a former selectman and also a former member of the school committee and chairperson of the school committee. And Edna, maybe you can start out by telling us when you were a selectman in Hingham.
I was a selectman in Hingham from 1988 to 1994. And preceding that time, I spent 16 years on the school committee. So I had 22 years of elective office in Hingham, and during that time, I must say, I enjoyed, great, the term collaborative, we had very collegial and collaborative ways of doing business. And Nelson, you know it well because you worked with me in so many ways on both of those committees. One of the distinguishing features of the town administration, and again, I represent the old school, so it was when the selectmen were the chief executive officers and acted that way. We had direct reports, and we deferred greatly. There was great deference to the department heads and to the people, to the advisory committee, to the various people who had great responsibilities in town. We deferred to them, and we may have had discussions. And we didn't have the open meeting law, and maybe that had something to do with the fact that we would sometimes be able to discuss issues behind the scenes and sort of iron out what could have become disagreements if they had gone public. So that's something that isn't going to change, and I would not recommend that we go back to the old way of doing things. In fact, when I ran for a selectman in 1988, I ran on the platform that I thought the town needed an executive secretary, and Charlie Costello came in, and he was wonderful. I mean, he did just what was needed. He had the personality for it. He had the talent, the collaborative ability to bring out the best in people, and I think that things went along reasonably well. Not that there weren't conflicts, and Nelson could point to quite a few that he was familiar with during all of those years, but we did manage them, I think, without undue public distress. But the thing that I am concerned about, and so grateful that you're taking on this project, is that I would like us not to give up Hingham's ability to govern itself. And we just heard Bruce talk about, his responsibilities, which were a little bit different than mine because you had the intermediary person. And I did too, but it was Charlie at the beginning of his reign, which I say that just in jest. But it was. I would like to hope that as you go through this process, that you are able to retain the concept of self-government. I would hope that. That the people who are now elected to boards, for example, the planning board, the people that we vote for planning board, we hope that they're going to protect the town and the interest and the qualities of life that we value in Hingham. We hope that those people will carry out our wishes. Otherwise, why would we vote for them? And the same goes for other elected offices in town. I would like to see you find a way to have checks and balances so as that the town administrator, or eventually I suppose it might evolve into something even stronger than that, would still retain, I think it was you, Nelson, or maybe it was you, Tom, who said that the chief executive officers, I think, should be the selectmen. I mean, that's what our town bylaw, since it began, has always meant. And I would like to think that the town administrator would be the town operating officer, and to do it with powers that flow through the selectmen. The other thing is that has evolved, and I think it may have happened, maybe it happened under you, Bruce, I'm not sure, but the chief financial officer of the town has now been sort of melded in with the town administrator. And I don't know whether that's more than, I don't know if those jobs should be separated. I honestly don't have a strong opinion about that, but I know it's a change. The town administrator, I think maybe administration and management of personnel is a different skill than financial expertise. I'm not sure because I'm not close enough to the situation to, to have a well-informed opinion. But it's something anyway that you might toss into your thinking. So, coming from the older perspective, when much less authority had been passed on to a town administrator. I just want to ask you to try to make sure that there are checks and balances so that the will of the people who vote for selectmen are not, well, so that their will is carried out, so that we have self-government in Hingham. That's my primary concern.
And,
Go ahead.
And two questions, I guess. One, you said that when you ran, you felt the town had evolved at that point in 1988 that a purely volunteer Board of Selectmen wasn't enough, that we needed some on-site administrative support.
Well, I wouldn't say that it wasn't...
Hang on one second.
Oh, Karen, I wouldn't say that it wasn't enough. I wouldn't use those words. I would say that, life was getting to be more complex, all of the state mandates that were coming down. I felt that a professional manager would be, or an executive secretary, a professional person that would be more in tune with the organizations and the state would be helpful to the town. Now, I had been schooled for 16 years in the school committee with very strong and very competent school superintendents, Bill Mahoney, Lou Ernst, and so I was certainly very comfortable with the concept of a strong administrator, and also comfortable with deferring to the advice of a person like that. But still, even in those years, felt that the final decision was made by the elected people. I think that's important.
Right, and so one of my questions was, then when the town passed the bylaw creating the position of executive secretary, do you recall how you went about transitioning?
Yes.
Moving Charlie into
We
that
had a
role?
search committee, and Iris Daigle was chairman of it. I can't remember who all the other people were. They interviewed a lot of different people. Were you on that one, Nelson?
No, I was not.
It's probably the only
Anyway,
one.
Iris was, maybe her father was on it, Scott, I don't know. Anyway, various people who were experienced in town. They interviewed a lot of people, and there was a trend in those days to, professionalize town departments. And so they found Charlie Costello for us, and the selectmen then voted to, on their recommendation, the selectmen voted to hire him. And it was a good decision.
And I guess what I was getting at, because we're struggling with the line to draw between sort of CEO and COO, between policy and administration. So I guess I was wondering, as you then approached having this resource available to you as the CEOs of the town, how did you decide what Charlie was going to do and what Charlie was going to be responsible
Well, he
for?
came in with a job description.
Okay.
A lot of this has to do with the attitude of the people who were on the board at the time. Let's see, who was it? It was Ed Lewicki, Kate Mahoney, all of whom were, certainly on board with the idea, welcoming. We had had Daisy Janey before that, and then we had Elaine Waugh, very competent women doing very good work for us, but we felt that one step above was what we were looking for. And so we welcomed what Charlie could do for us. And Charlie, of course, had the personal skills as well as the excellent training from, his previous education. And so it worked out very well. I was the last. I was the last of the selectmen. The others all left. And I was the last of the do-it-yourself selectmen. And it was a very, very smooth transition, and he simply took over, and we, worked with him. And he was in contact also with the organizations and at the state level were helpful. We were too. I mean, there was the associations that selectmen belonged to, but he just brought more. He brought more to the table, more expertise, more network.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
When Charlie spoke with us, the one thing I remember most regarding what he said when he advised us was, we need concreteness.
Yeah.
which says to me, we need to spell out in clear terms
I agree.
what the authority of the town administrator is, so that
agree.
he or she will know what their role is. And hopefully the selectmen will respect that role.
Well,
Is
yeah,
that-
they should.
Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yes. There was never a crossword between anyone, while I was in the office, there was never a crossword between us and Charlie.
But concreteness in the document, in the bylaw, is really what he was talking
Right.
about.
Well, he had a job description, and that involved certain duties that he was supposed to do, and we built him an office, and he set about fulfilling those duties, and he did them admirably.
Any other questions, Tom?
Yes. I'm interested, Edna, in what parts of the self-managing selectmen duties back in the late 80s you were quickest to want to hand off to Charlie, and the ones where you thought that professional assistance was most needed. Because, as you say, you served on the last Board of Selectmen, in which there was direct, hands-on, day-to-day administration of what was happening in the town.
I would
And
sit
if
with the department
somebody called
heads.
town hall and said there's a pothole, you picked the phone up and spoke directly to the DPW head. Or maybe you called the foreman and told him to get out.
I
But-
walked the boundaries with Brian Sullivan in his car. We didn't walk them. We rode in a truck. No, all of that was we're never going to go back to that, and we shouldn't either. But what Charlie did was he immediately instituted weekly meetings with the department heads, for example, and that was an opportunity for the department heads to talk with one another. And that was something where we had occasional meetings, but not organized as Charlie did.
Did the selectmen attend those, or just Charlie?
No, as a matter of fact, although I suppose we could have, but he organized that to start with. And then, well, for example, I would sit with the department heads and go through their budgets, and, because then we changed from the advisory committee doing the budget, then the selectmen did the budget, and then they passed it on to, so I would sit and do that. And there would be times when I would have to tell people that there were very bad times, in the late 80s, early 90s, there were some really bad financial times, very little funding from the state, things were getting cut back. It was not an easy time.
Yeah, I was on the
financially.
personnel board when you people would say, we're
were you
looking for
there?
zeros
It
this
was
year.
terrible. And so, so anyway, it was better to have a professional person who would say, I'm sorry, our budget needs to be reduced. It was better, although we could do it, it was better to have the consistency, the professional face in the office that would be able to carry that off. It was just a better model, that's all. And so I was very much in favor of it. It did not remove us from our responsibilities, though. We still had to, pay attention to know what was going on and approve or disapprove. And Charlie was collaborative and cooperative enough to work that way with us.
Any other questions? Edna, it's rare that I have an opportunity, or any of us has an opportunity to thank you for all of your years of service. It's greatly appreciated. Town's been very fortunate, and that you're still
Nelson, I
serving.
could pass it right back to you. Nelson and I go back a few years.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rebuffo, yes.
Thank you for listening to me.
This is Fred. Edna
have a
made a
question for
good
you.
point.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Edna made a very good point, which I didn't, and I was remiss, and that is the separation of duties between the town administrator and the chief financial officer.
Yeah.
We used to have two separate people fill that role.
Yes.
We promoted the chief financial officer to be the town administrator. It was always our intent to go back
Was it?
to, and that was an objective, And we interviewed people to fill that objective. And one of the issues, I hate to burst your bubble, finding talent to do
Right.
in today's complex society, both town administrator and town financial responsibilities. That was difficult. We were unsuccessful in finding somebody, but I would agree with Edna's comment that it would be separated. And in your delineation of responsibilities, to whom does the chief financial officer report?
Well, it's sort of
What
interesting,
does he
Bruce.
do?
Yeah.
Well,
In other words,
yeah,
can
it's-
you let us know, in your perspective, or when these positions were separated, what was the delineation of the responsibilities of the financial officer vis-a-vis the town administrator?
Well, and
Both of it, to
yeah,
both,
well, wait,
right?
dialogue here. When Charlie was the town administrator and Ted was the chief financial officer in title, the responsibility was for Ted to do the budget discussion in collaboration with advisory in the departments, but the pass-through was through the town
Through
administrator.
the time, yeah.
Yeah.
That was the difference. With the Ted assuming both roles, if you will, the intent was the town accountant, or someone who filled that title, would become the town financial officer, to keep them separate. And the reason for that is just the duties and responsibilities become
The magnitude of it.
just
Yeah.
widespread. Who's talking to the rating agencies? Who's giving them the information that they need? Now, current structure works like that because it's basically the same, except we don't have a town financial
Well, it's
officer.
interesting, Bruce. So one of my charges on the committee is to do some review of sample charters and bylaws and special acts. And it's interesting, Betty pulled together certain of those documents from the AAA-rated communities. And it's been sort of interesting for me to find out that actually that role is collapsed in a number of those communities. And so the mechanics for developing numbers and such may fall with a town accountant. But the budget preparation, the financial responsibility, really in those documents rests with the town administrator, the town manager, and I think we've heard that from other folks that have spoken to us as well.
Edna made another point that we should remember. She mentioned she was 88 to 94. I was more recent. The town evolves. So be very careful what you write.
Right.
Yeah, no, it has to
What you
be.
wish for.
Absolutely.
Right, no question.
I would also say that I served on the screening committee for town administrator successor to Charlie. And I spoke with Charlie about what were the most important qualifications of a town administrator, and he said by far the number one is financial expertise.
I would agree.
Yeah.
And I think we heard that from Tom Grew as well.
Yes,
right?
we did.
Yeah, I would agree with that, at least in understanding who does the
Right.
mechanics, maybe.
Right.
Exactly.
Whatever you call it, whatever, but
Right.
it was always our intent, was my intent, I should say, to keep them separate so that the town administrator could do more hands-on with the other departments.
Yes. Thank you very much. And anything to add?
No, just that I think is an important point. It occurred to me that the two, the administration and the financial, actually could, there are rare people who can do both equally well,
It's true.
That's the good
in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're right. And when you, one other point, since I was involved in two searches for town administrator, finding the talent in today's marketplace for the price we pay is going to be very difficult.
Right.
It's very
Tom Grew also told us, Bruce, when we hired him as a consultant to fill the town administrator vacancy, that because the role of the town administrator is not spelled out in a bylaw or a charter or a special act, and because the powers are not very extensive, we were not likely to get very strong candidates. And I think we ended up in that situation.
I would also agree with you on that, and I would also say that Tom also told us that when you have an internal candidate, that also levels the playing field.
It's true.
And that's the other side of that, whether or not that's something you should consider to make sure that that's not precluded in the decision process. Because we do that, and we have done that in other departments.
Right, but you may recall that the internal candidate dropped by the wayside at that time,
Yes.
early in the process.
Yes, he did.
Yep.
Yeah.
Bruce, can I just ask one other question? Because you talked about the separation of roles. When we had to, Charlie and Ted, who did Ted report to? Did he
Charlie.
He did report to the TA. Yeah.
To
Okay.
Charlie, very directly.
Yeah.
But he was the interface as well, correct me, Karen, he was the interface directly with advisory.
Yes.
And that deloaded, if you will,
Charlie.
because he didn't have to go to all those advisory sessions. Ted does, and that's, I think that's a burden, and why it should be separated.
Yes, but I spent 6 years on advisory as well, and there was never any doubt that Charlie was the one you were relying on.
I agree.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't dispute that at all. That's why I said the reporting responsibility to the question you asked me about the chain of command was very clear.
So in terms of the bylaw, it's not necessarily a disconnect to say that the authority might lie with the town administrator, but there may be staffing below the town administrator to carry on any piece of those functions, as you suggest, to make sure that the town administrator
Right.
is focusing on the priorities as determined by the Board of
Right.
Selectmen.
Correct.
Right.
And
I
that's
think that's
Well said.
right. Well said. And it's really up to the Board of Selectmen and the TA to decide how to organize at that stage. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Thanks.
important
Thanks
point,
both
though,
of
Bruce.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And now, just before you leave, one thought that I wanted to ask. You've had experience on the school side and the town side. And it seems to me, as an outside observer, that historically the schools have always been run with a very strong administrator.
Very strong.
Basically running that department subject to what classes are we going to offer, or even then. But
Oh, yeah.
why do you have any thoughts on why it seems more problematic in some ways to be talking about a strong town administrator on the
Oh, yeah.
town side?
Yeah, because
When it's so less the case on the school side?
because in the tradition of New England towns, the school superintendent was the wise man who knew what it took to become the superintendent, and people deferred a little bit to his wisdom and knowledge. Also, schools are schools, and I must say that the school superintendents that we had, and Nelson can back me up on this, Bill Mahoney and Lou Ernst, I did not work with the subsequent ones. Both of them would say any time that if there was something that the committee did not approve of, they wouldn't even bring it before us because they were too smart to do that. And we did have performance reviews, and we did, identify areas where they needed to improve. So we did, we I don't want to say held their feet to the fire, but in a sense we did. We did have expectations, but they were wise men, and they did what they were expected to do. But then when you go into being a selectman, you don't have just schools with sports and people with little kids who just want everything to be wonderful for them. You go into people, you have a police department that has wonderful people, but a little conflict every now and then you've got a fire department that always comes through and does everything everybody wants. But you've got the DPW with potholes and drainage issues and stuff that keeps coming over your desk. And then you've got the senior citizens over there who at the time were in danger of losing their Hersey House space in those years. So you have all these different things that are going on all the time. And so you push it down here and it pops up there. So being a selectman is enormously complicated and diverse, and you never know from one minute to the next what issue is going to pop up and need your attention. And I will say, along with, I think Bruce said the same thing, it can be a 24/7. I used to travel sometimes, and my husband would complain because I would have my computer with me, and I'd be answering
Right.
different issues. So it is a big job, and the idea of having a professional person, managing, putting out the brush fires was a good idea, even though you still get drawn into them. The professional person in the office would be able to handle some of the brush fires before they reach the selectman level.
Did you implement a process of evaluation or reviews with
Yeah, we
the
did.
town
We had a-
administrator when he came in? Or was that a little too early and undefined?
I must have. I can't remember. I must have, because I did it with Bill Mahoney and Lou Ernst, if you can imagine it. But we did. So I must have done it with the town administrator. I can't remember, but I'm sure I did, because it's. I mean, I'm not a stranger to private business either, and I have some experience there, and I would certainly have brought some of that to bear.
Right. Okay.
Thanks, Edna.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your time.
That's
Thank
great.
you. You really are doing the Lord's work here.
We'll
If you're
see.
gonna-
Wait until you see our report. We don't want to put you on the spot.
Is there anyone else who would like to give us their thoughts on the role, responsibilities, authority of the town administrator before we get to Judy and Scott? Okay. Then let's move to the next order of business, which is to hear from Judy Cole and Scott Ford. Judy was the chairman of the most recent Government Study Committee, and Scott was a key member of that committee who, if I recall correctly, focused on town administrator, town manager, where should Hingham be? And although they can describe better what they did, but if you would come up and sit and talk with us, we would appreciate it.
And for anyone at home who might have been wondering whether the fellow to my right is our monitor designed to keep us in line, he's not. Tom Pyle is the liaison from the advisory committee to the bylaw committee, which is charged with reporting to town meeting. And of course, the report goes through the advisory committee for its review and recommendations.
Thank you.
Judy, would you tell us where you live?
Yes, Judy Cole, 79 Whitcomb Avenue, Hingham.
And Scott?
Scott Ford, 10 Village Lane.
And maybe you can give us a brief statement regarding the role of your committee a couple of years ago.
Well, we looked at the town in a holistic way, I think. We looked at many, many issues. We looked at the possibility of increasing the number of the Board of Selectmen from 3 members to 5 members. We looked at the difference between town administrator and town manager, and talked a little bit about that. We talked about possibly having a permanent building management committee. Trying to think what else here, Scott.
Elected versus
Appointed treasurer
appointed
collector.
treasurer.
Appointed treasurer,
Community of,
right.
Director of Community Affairs or Community Planning.
The town meeting quorum, which we successfully lowered in the hopes that we would start town meeting more efficiently and quickly. Let's see.
Representative town meeting?
We did talk about
Briefly.
representative briefly. Nobody was in favor.
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
Electronic voting,
Electronic voting, which is now a committee in its own right.
term limits.
Term limits, we talked a little bit about, and we figured the voters were the best limits of terms that we could get. We did some support of the sewer department DPW consolidation. The town meeting quorum, we reduced.
Town reduced
The
it.
town reduced
just
it.
looked
We
at it.
didn't, we just looked at it. The town reduced it. And I think that was just about.
Talk about doing the Lord's work.
Well, let's focus on the town administrator role, and I don't know how deeply you looked into the existing role of the town administrator at that time, and what your thoughts and conclusions were. Anything you can share with us about that would be very helpful.
Sure, that was one of the tasks we were asked to look at, and it was presented to us in what seemed to be a very simple manner. Would you look at the possibility of having a change from a town administrator to a town manager, which on its face looked relatively simple, but quickly became far more complex. This is why you're doing all of your work.
Right.
And our starting point was looking at the then existing bylaw, or current bylaw, Article 5, Section 1, I think, which was extremely broad and states that any matter can be delegated by the selectmen to the town administrator. I believe the only specifically delineated item in the bylaw is with regard to the budget. So then the question became, what matters have been specifically assigned to the town administrator? And that process became a bit of an investigation. We were presented with two documents that were very similar in many respects, but were not identical. One was a 2002 job description. Another was a 2011 job description. The latter was much more comprehensive. And while there was significant overlap in those, in the specifics contained in each of those descriptions, they were not identical. And there seemed to be, number one, some disparity, and number two, a lack of clarity as to what responsibilities were specifically delineated or assigned to the town administrator, which of course was also very different than the perception of members of the committee, members of the town, in terms of the role and responsibilities of the town administrator. And so ultimately what the Government Study Committee recommended back to the town in its final report was that the then existing specifically delegated or assigned responsibilities be written down and kept in the files and made public and maintained, even if those responsibilities changed on a regular basis. And it wouldn't be until that point in time that any committee, including yours, could properly recommend that any changes be made. Now, there were some constant themes in terms of the differences between the responsibilities of the then and current town administrator versus what a town manager might have. And the primary one, which I'm sure is an issue you've dealt with quite a bit, is with regard to personnel, hiring, firing outside of civil service. But beyond that, it was a bit of a morass when it came to budgeting, when it came to day-to-day supervision of town employees, whether or not those responsibilities had been formally assigned or formally delegated. Many, if not most of the participants in this entire process, Nelson, thank you for your help in that process, you were one of them, confirmed many of the same things, that the town administrator had a lot of responsibility, but specifically what it was not written down. It wasn't clear. It was kept in people's heads. It was a day-to-day practice, but it hadn't been codified, if you will. So that was, sorry for a long-winded summary, the ways in which we handled the process. And we ended up basically saying back to our town, look, delineate the specific responsibilities, and then the town can decide what needs to be changed.
Do you know, Scott, whether anything was done in response to your report? Was such a document written up?
No, but I think what was done is what we're looking at here tonight, and all the good work that you've done so far. Right. I would have to assume. But in terms of preparing a specific document, Tom, I don't know.
So it's like a lot of wonderful reports with wise recommendations, they were handed over and nobody acted on them.
Unless this is the consequence of the recommendation right here.
It was a long time coming, but it seems to me that you're confirming that this is not an issue that has sort of suddenly popped up to be addressed, but has been a chronic management issue for the town to address for some time. And maybe now we're ready to do it.
Yes.
And I also think the role changes as more and more trust, as people trust the person in that office, and the selectman may give more and more authority to that person in the position. And so it has to be changed, at least the job description has to be changed. It's good if it's changed periodically, every year or every 2 years, the job description.
Let me ask you, though, the role of the town administrator could be weakened or strengthened by who's elected. And do you have any thoughts about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, a lot of it goes back, Nelson, to what Edna had to say, and Edna was a fantastic contributor to this process as well. And I remember what Edna would say repeatedly is, town administrator means power to the people, and power to the people is exercised through through their voting of the selectmen who are charged to run the town. And if the voters are not happy with the way in which the selectmen have run the town, which includes the delegation of specific responsibilities to the town administrator, there can be democracy at its best through another election and replacement, which would then result in potential changes there. So in that respect, whether it's not an opinion whether it's good or bad, it's a fact that that flexibility certainly is more democratic at the expense of certainty.
And at the expense of maybe it being an attractive position, should we have to fill this role.
And that's another point, Nelson, that came up throughout that process about the difficulty in filling a quote-unquote, and we put it in quotes, town administrator role, that the applicant pool is generally less fulsome than it is for a town manager position. And this, Nelson, is something I believe you've had experience with, and maybe others on the committee have as well.
The point which I accept as an accurate description of what has existed up to now, this phrase that all power flows through the selectman to the town administrator, carrying with it essentially a connotation that he does whatever we want him to do, and anything we don't want him to do, we'll just disregard him. It may be an accurate description of where we currently stand, but the power that is said to flow through the selectman to the town administrator is granted to the selectman by the town. And it seems to me that it is fully democratic for the town to say, now just a minute, folks, we think that some reallocation of responsibility in the name of sound management of the town is appropriate, and that there are certain types of responsibilities or authority that a bylaw ought to confer directly on a town administrator, and also spell out the degree to which that's subject to review or reversal or the like by the Board of Selectmen. So it does seem to me that come spring we're going to have the purely democratic form of a town meeting expressing a view as to what the source of authority and allocation ought to be. Otherwise, we're just wasting our time.
Well, Tom, it's no different than the issue we face with town treasurer collector, whether that should be made appointed versus elected. In other words, we can use our democratic process to reduce or eliminate our democratic input. And that's exactly what happened there. And there was rationale presented for that. And we as a town decided that the rationale supported moving that from an elected position to an appointed position, even though it compromised democracy.
Any questions?
Yeah, I know you've been kind enough to provide us with your report and the background and the information that you received. I wonder if you would be willing to speak to a few of the issues that seem to be recurring in our discussions with various people on the sort of what's an appropriate role of a town administrator. Let's take the one you mentioned, which is personnel. Hiring, firing, oversight, administration, discipline, and those sorts of things. There seems to be a general consensus that the department heads' selection or appointment is one of the distinguishing features between a town manager sort of operation and a town administrator sort of operation. But it also appears from a review of comparable communities, and I wonder if this was what you found as well, that below that level, both town managers and town administrators essentially have the power and authority and responsibility of managing the operations and, reviewing employees or determining hiring or whether discipline, doing annual reviews, and all of those sorts of things. Did that distinction between department heads versus everybody else show up in your studies as well?
I don't think that it did, Tom. I'll look at it a different way and then come back to it. But I remember when I was chair of Historic Districts Commission and Charlie would call and solicit very limited feedback on the administrator's role. And the review that administrator received didn't really reflect that feedback, and that's okay. But I thought, whether it be my interaction with that administrator or the Historic Commission's interaction with that administrator, would be important in determining that person's performance, in addition to how that person performed on a daily basis at Town Hall. I don't think that whether that was good or bad, I don't think that process would be any different whether that person was a town administrator or a town manager, and the real crux of it is going to be with regard to hiring and with regard to firing, and less on the day-to-day management.
Well, and so, but from Tom's question, I guess, it's that analysis for positions below the department head stops at the town administrator. In many of the bylaws we've looked at in charters and special acts, regardless of whether you call the person a town administrator or a town manager. And I guess that's what so the Board of Selectmen really, aside from whoever the town administrator is, having a responsibility to keep the Board of Selectmen informed on, general personnel issues, that, that's really the town administrator or the town manager's job. And to your point, I think some of the better, in my judgment, some of the better bylaws and special acts, and to Edna's point, pull in the interaction of the town administrator with appointed or elected boards. And I think, I think we can all agree that the volunteer, caliber in this town on these appointed elected boards, deserves respect in that process. So to your point, many of the bylaws I've looked at would suggest that just what you said, Charlie, should occur, but then the next step should also occur, which is that feedback should be part of the evaluation of that employee. But I guess the question is, below the department head level, who should hire, fire, supervise those folks?
Judy, do you have a
I think that's up to
that?
the Board of Selectmen, really. I mean, the Board of Selectmen really can give, I think Scott made that point in the final report, that it doesn't matter what the title is, it matters what powers and authority that person has. And so it's really up, at least in Hingham, to the Board of Selectmen to give such authority and power that they want to do.
Let me ask you a question. I'm going to quote from your report.
That's always dangerous.
The town must first make, this is consistent with what you've said, must first make clear what specific duties and powers are currently delegated to the town administrator, exactly as you've said, and the town can then decide whether or not changes should be made. and not so much to the title, but to the duties and powers. And I guess what I'm asking myself now is, isn't that what we're doing here? Isn't that, we've looked at what we see as the duties and powers, and I think we're being asked to propose a bylaw which I think incorporates the notion that we might recommend changes. And what I'm saying, does it?
Absolutely, Nelson.
Okay.
In other words, when we were first charged to look at this and we first went to the bylaw, naively, I expected a far more detailed bylaw.
Right.
And bylaws are broad by design and for a purpose. Here, you have a number of choices at your disposal to recommend to the town. No changes at all. This is working fine, no changes. Alternatively, you could identify specific areas that should be designated to a town administrator and incorporate them into the bylaw beyond just the one specified element of budgeting, hiring, firing, and specifically with regard to what departments, what levels, et cetera. Or alternatively, it could be so broad as to say that the town manager, at that point, the title only matters in terms of the following authority, has the ultimate authority in his or her sole discretion to hire, to fire, department heads beneath, below, et cetera.
Right.
So the answer, I'm sorry, a long-winded way of answering your question, yes.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Scott, you raise peripherally, and this issue of management when you have other elected boards. My recollection and I was active in various town things, when Charlie arrived, was that one of the major contributions he made over the years was that we finally pretty much got to a point where everybody getting a check from the town of Hingham directly was operating under the same sort of rules of employment, which was not true when we had more elected boards, and we had situations where it hadn't historically been the selectmen who picked who the chief employee in a department run by an elected board happened to be. And so clearly the elected board needs to have some input into the evaluation. And if it's the chief person in the office responsible for administering the goals that the elected board is charged with fulfilling, you would want to have a say if it wasn't working out. But my sense was that over the years, we at least got to the point where we had professional management and oversight and annual reviews and sort of everybody operating under the town administrator, and that was a plus and could exist consistent with the electoral responsibilities of various specific boards to carry out their governmental responsibilities.
But there could be a downside to that as well, Tom. If the town administrator is vested with the authority to appoint to the non-elected boards, then those appointees may feel beholden to or responsive to the town administrators or managers, let's call the town manager, philosophy or policy, which is something that is not generally delegated to the current town administrator. And if that were the case, then the independence of those boards, really whether they're appointed or elected, but especially if they're appointed under that scenario, might be compromised, whereby the town administrator's desires, policies, et cetera, affect the day-to-day operations of those appointed boards. I don't know if that makes sense, but
sure, it's the same issue we're struggling with with departments directly under the Board of Selectmen. Where do you draw a line between policy responsibility and administration or management when there's no magic formula for getting to that line? It adds the added complication of whether in your hypothetical, whether a town administrator is either got so much power he's running the planning process of the town on his own, or feels so responsive to the wishes of the selectmen in such matters that he pays more attention to the selectmen than he does to the elected planning board on any given issue. It's just choosing hypothetically without... it seems to me if we strike the right sort of dividing line, then the policy argument that may or may not exist between the Board of Selectmen and an elected planning board over some specific aspect of land use in the town of Hingham will be fought out in public and on the floor of town meeting the way it's supposed to, rather than being subsumed under the administration. I think that it's very important that the actual day-to-day administration kinds of things be uniform across the town with all its employees. We had problems when you had an outlier elected board with 1 or 2 employees who were just totally on their own and weren't going through personnel or anything else. We don't want to go back to that.
But the alternative
But you're right that there has to be a careful recognition so that the town administrator is not exercising the policy authority of an elected board.
Yeah, because the
Any board.
potential alternative is concentrating a sphere of influence on someone who is not elected and presents a more difficult situation that can be changed versus a town administrator whose roles, responsibilities, et cetera, can be influenced by the voters through their vote of the selectmen who directly control the town administrator's responsibilities.
And yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
That's great.
And Judy, Edna, and I have 300 pounds of favorite material that we would gladly share with all of you on this topic. Bradford Road, here it comes.
Thanks
so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Chief Duff, we would love to have you speak. Please come up here and identify yourself. Tell us where you live and what position you hold.
You mind if I sit?
Please.
Absolutely.
Mark Duff, 37 Bradley Park Drive, Fire Chief and Emergency Management Director. And that Emergency Management Director plays a big part in some of my comments. But I think the first thing I want to point out is let's not forget the role of the Assistant Town Administrator. Betty Foley is very important to this organization, not because she's Betty Foley, but that assistant job is very important. I have no problem as a department head or as an emergency management director referring directly to her if for some reason the current town administrator, is out of town or on vacation or not available. There are many times that I call Betty looking for advice and counsel because I don't want to bother the town administrator, and she's always been true to form, and I'm just as comfortable as dealing with Betty as I am with Ted or whoever. But I think that's important.
That's a great point.
With regards to appointment of department heads, I fully agree with, or I fully support the fact that those appointments belong with the selectmen. I believe that the town administrator is a big player in that, and he should make his recommendations, and that should be very much heard. But I firmly believe that department head appointments belong with the selectmen. Whether positions below that belong with the selectmen, I would question. Especially now with the change of the procedures in the fire department that will take place after I retire, or when on or after June 30th, whether the Board of Selectmen needs to be interviewing firefighters at entry, firefighter paramedics at entry level, or even police officers for that matter. I'm not sure that's necessary. I'm really not. I mean, the Board of Selectmen doesn't interview entry-level people at the DPW or get involved with any of those other issues, so I'm not convinced that needs to be done, but that's certainly the prerogative of the board. Communications, as the fire chief, there are times that I need to talk to the town administrator at 2 o'clock at night, 2 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock at night, and there are times that I do bypass the town administrator and go right to a board member to notify them of an issue that's going on in the community. Sometimes I do both. Sometimes I send emails out. Sometimes I send make cell phone calls, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it depends on the issue. In my particular case, having a professional relationship with both the town administrator and the selectmen, it depends on what the situation is, what I'm going to do. Or sometimes I call both. But there's a very fine line there between, when do I bring the town administrator in on an issue, or Betty, or when do I go to the selectmen, or both. A perfect example of what's going on right now down at the Lincoln School with their elevator being removed from service. And this might be a small point, but that's a 5-story building, and there were issues that needed to be addressed down there. Irma Lotta came to me and asked me if I would do that, and I basically dealt directly with Irma. I copied Ted on everything that was going on. So there are times that I think that a department head should be dealing directly with the selectmen. I have no problem with that. Certain selectmen have certain talents that that department head may want to tap in on, and I think they should be able to do that as well. So I don't know whether I've made things more confusing or less confusing, but I think the main point that I wanted to get across is, let's not forget our assistant town administrator.
No, Chief, let me just follow up on what I think well, I know what you're telling us. I just want to confirm it, that you're really the one who decides whether you will go to the town administrator or directly to a selectman with regard to a particular issue that you are facing.
At 90% of that time, it gets changed through. It goes through the town administrator.
90% of the time.
90%,
but there are times when you'll decide, this is so important, I need to speak.
Absolutely, and it's not so much, Nelson, is I need a decision from them. It's they need to know what's going on.
Right.
I don't want to, especially where our selectmen, all 3 selectmen live in Hingham. Naturally, they would live in Hingham, but where they live in the community and Ted does not, I don't want a selectman getting caught on the street saying, hey, what happened yesterday down here, there, or whatever, and them not knowing what's going on if it's that important.
Yes.
We recently had an incident where some firefighters, fortunately, had to be taken to the hospital for some precautionary measures due to a call they went on, and I immediately, I think it was the next morning, notified the selectmen that this had happened, just so they'll know what's going on. So
Chief,
there's a fine line there.
Right. With regard to day-to-day management kinds of things that may come up, is it always the town administrator
Yes.
or the assistant town administrator?
Yes. And again, a lot of times we run stuff by Betty but yeah, it's very rare that we'll call a selectman to talk about purchasing a fire engine or that just doesn't happen.
With regard to budget matters, are your dealings exclusively with the town administrator and the town accountant?
Town administrator.
Town administrator.
And there are times when I do need legal counsel. Fortunately, they're rare. But I will just call Ted and tell him what's going on, or I'll call Betty, or both in some cases. Many times when I make those, especially if they're email notifications, I make them to both. I have a policy in my own department where I want my deputy chief to know everything's going on in the department. In the event that something happens to me, he can step right into my shoes, and I think that's very important that happens here. That God forbid that something happens to our town administrator, whoever he is or whatever, Betty needs to be on top of everything so she can step right in and seamless transition.
Chief, can you talk a little bit about your role as the Emergency Management Director and how that position or that role interfaces with either the town administrator?
Absolutely. The first, make no bones about it, the chief elected officials in the community run the community during emergencies. That's a given, and I believe that's dictated by state law, okay? There's one exception to that rule, and that one exception to the rule is if the incident involves a hazardous materials incident, and in some cases, terrorism can fall over into that, then by federal law, the fire chief, and then not a terrorism incident involving police matters, but
So hazmat?
hazmat and certain terrorism incidents, by federal law, the fire chief is in charge. But clearly, and you saw that even, not that I want to compare us to what happened at 9/11 in the city of New York, but I mean, the fire commissioner ran the fire department, the police commissioner ran the police department, but the mayor was clearly in charge down there. And that's the way it should be. If there are issues that need to be addressed, I will call a selectman. We have an emergency operations center at the fire station. The few times that we've had to activate it, the selectmen generally stop in and see what's going on, get appraised. I know Bruce was good at doing that. Irma's very good at doing that. But ultimately, the selectmen are in charge of the community, and they've always in the past said to myself, you run the fire department, you run emergency management, the police chief needs to do his thing, the highway superintendent needs to do his thing. As long as they know what's going on, that's the important thing.
So in those situations, God forbid, you would work directly with the Board of Selectmen in setting priorities for response?
Absolutely. And the only time I think the board would get involved in something like that is if there was, God forbid, a dispute between department heads on where the priorities are. Then as the emergency management director, I would go to the board and say, listen,
Right.
This is what needs to be done. And that's one advantage of not getting into the ramifications of civilian versus professional emergency management directors, but one advantage of having an appointed, either a fire chief or a police chief as the emergency management director, they can tell people what to do. Right. Civilians, it's a lot more difficult, and some communities do it that way.
And so what is the role of the town administrator in that event?
Again, it depends on the level of the emergency. Many times it's going to be the first call will go to the town administrator and say, this is what's going on. You need to decide whether you want to bring the board in or not. Sometimes they'll say to me, I will call them in the morning, or yes, we will call them right away. We have a very good relationship in Hingham. It's always worked very well, and the relationship between the department heads, the town administrator, the emergency management director. The role of the fire chief is going to change when the strong chiefs law goes away in July 1. I supported that decision when I was asked to support it. I'm not sure that was not a mistake. In second thought, I'm not sure that was a good move, but we'll see how it goes.
Nelson, may I?
Tom, sure.
Chief, you have the seniority. I think you're the senior town employee, actually.
Other than Doc Gallo, yes. I think that's correct.
I'd like to go back to the old school comments that Edna made, and I'm not sure that there's an old school, new school here. I think there's an appropriate school depending on which decade we happen to be in, and that's what I wanted to ask you a little bit about. In 1988, or immediately prior to Charlie's arrival, do you recall roughly what the size of the fire department was? How many were in it?
I would actually not be surprised, Tom, if the fire department was bigger in 1988.
Yeah.
I think it was.
Yeah,
It was. I believe, the staffing levels in 1988 Actually, I do know because I was hired in 1973. 1975 is when we incorporated the ambulance. Additional people were hired to cover that. So I think the staffing levels for the fire department in 1988 were 64 men, and we're now down to 53.
And with respect, we had the same three.
Just to add to that, in the run volume in 1988 was somewhere between 1,600 and 1,800 emergency calls, and we're currently running 4,000.
Right. That was my next point. Although we still have 3 stations, the same number.
I know where this is going.
For the time being. No, the 4th station's another committee. There's been a significant change in the role of the department in the emergency services area.
Correct.
We made a conscious decision as a town to go to providing ambulance service through our department, professionalizing it with paramedics, getting the ambulances, doing all of that, which is a pretty broad expansion in a number of ways from the traditional firefighter role. Are budgets more complex nowadays?
Working with the town administrator, really no, because, we have a line item budget, we look at it, and we determine where we need to make increases, where we don't need to make increases. The town administrator, with Charlie Costello and with Ted, they have a very good sixth sense of how to approach it. They'll say to me, "Hey, Mark, this is the way you want to present that. You do need to do this. You don't need to do that." And I don't think they're any more complex. The job is more complex, but this is. I will tell you on a very positive note. Hingham is a great town to work for. And when I go to various meetings with my counterparts, counter fire chiefs, both in the state level and more so on the local level, I have to be careful on what I tell people because Hingham just is different. This is a great community to work for. It's great. You get great support as department heads. You get great support from the taxpayers. As long as you come in to the town administrator, to the advisory committee, to capital outlay, and present them with a reasonable, honest budget, they always support it. I consider myself, A, very fortunate to be a fire chief, and B, very fortunate to be a fire chief in a community like this. We have a great community. And certainly the volunteer boards are a major part of that.
Does the complexity that you see in the operations of the fire department today versus in the late 80s extend as well to police and others? In other words, I'm thinking in terms of a town administrator with weekly department head meetings and what goes on there. How much different is the interrelationship of various departments and working together and joint responsibilities than it was back in the days when you'd struggle into Lewinsky and say, this is what I need now?
That's a very good question, but I will tell you, because I started out working at the DBW, and then I transitioned over to the fire department. And again, this is another one of those points that makes Hingham a great community to work in and to live in, because the department relationships with Franny Ford and Herbie Cole and Oscar Beck and Ray Campbell and Chief Patch and Dick Wetter and Bill Johnson and Warren Lincoln and all those people, there's always been that cooperation there. One reason is because we have good department heads. And another reason is, and I'm not afraid to say it, the boards of selectmen in the past years have insisted on it. But even going back to when Herbie, you remember Herbie Cole? Herbie was a character, but the relationship has always been good in that respect. long, long before we ever had town administrators or executive secretaries or whatever. The interdepartment relationships, in my experience, have been wonderful. You call, pick up a phone, and the department that probably cooperates with people more than anybody is the DPW. They get pulled in so many different directions, from, you know, fixing potholes to I need a backhoe for a half a day, or I need a dump truck, or can you do this, or you can do that. But the relationship, and school department, when we have emergencies and we need schools, or we need school buses, or any of that, the relationship in Hingham has always been very, very, very good. And if anything, it's improving. Not.
Do you think that the role of town administrator has contributed to that, or improved it, or helped it to be achieved in the intervening 20 years?
I don't know, Tom. That's a tough question. I don't want. I call them as I see them, and I think the relationship has always just been there. I mean, it's nice having. It's very nice having department head meetings. Department heads are free to speak their piece at the meetings. We do that. We don't do it every month, but we probably have 8 or 12 department heads meetings a year. They last about an hour. People come in, state their business. Many times Betty has a presentation. Ted has a presentation. They only last about an hour. I find them very, very helpful.
Let me ask you this.
I wasn't expecting to be up here this long, but
Before there was a town administrator and you were dealing with individual selectmen, or the chief was, you had to deal with 3 people. Is it, I assume being able to speak with the town administrator and having the town administrator vet it really makes the operation much more efficient.
yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if I do need to find, you know, a good point. I mean, I can't speak to what the relationship between department heads was and the selectmen before we had a town administrator or a town executive secretary, because I wasn't high enough in the chain of command to comment on that. But it's nice to be able to pick up a phone and say, listen, I need some advice. As a matter of fact, I did it yesterday. I talked to Ted about a personnel issue yesterday. It's nice to be able to pick up a phone, get the advice. If Ted's not available, Betty's available, or they'll say, listen, he's not here right now, we'll call you back. You can't do that with a board of selectmen. I mean, I think that's unreasonable.
Now, let me ask you sort of I guess this may be a similar question, but obviously with a town administrator, selectmen change. But having a town administrator who stays and has been here for some period of time, I assume promotes consistency.
Correct. Correct.
And that's important. Both of those are important to you, I assume, as a department head.
Well, absolutely, but again, I think we're kind of spoiled here in Hingham because it's a very well-run town, and the transition has always been good. Once in a while, there'll be a slight disagreement between the fire chief and a board member on a couple of issues, but you know, we move beyond that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
You made a comment about town council and checking in when you need to consult with an attorney.
Correct.
That's because the town either has a policy or bylaw, I'm not sure the precise source, but essentially nobody gets access to the town's lawyer without going through the town administrator.
That's correct.
Board of
And I
Selectmen.
think Betty can speak more about that than I can, but absolutely. And the other great resource here, who works right under the town, right in the town administrator's office, is our human resource director. He's a great resource. That is probably one of the best moves the communities, other than hiring a town administrator, one of the best moves the town has done in years is to have an HR person. I call the HR person as much as I call Ted probably, and He's a great resource in interviewing people and setting up interviews, in issues that come up that we need advice on. That's a great resource, and I guess he reports directly to the town administrator.
Before we had a human resource director, actually the town administrator or executive secretary carried out that role. And then, we moved to a human resource director, and who works under the town administrator.
Very important position. Very important position.
With respect to your interrelationship with other aspects of town government, you've described somewhat the town administrator, and you've also mentioned the Board of Selectmen and advisory. How does the relationship with the town administrator interact with the way in which the departments relate to the advisory committee and the role of the advisory committee?
Well, in the 10 years that I've been chief, I've never had a challenge between one and the other. So, for the benefit of the people that are listening, I prepare my budget. I'm actually presenting it tomorrow night to the selectmen. Ted sends his budget sheets out, I think, in early October. Myself and the deputy sit down and review them, determine what our needs are, both on capital and operating expenses, adjust fuel lines. One particular item that goes up every year is the emergency medical services supplies. So we figure that all out in the 20 or 30 budget lines that we have. Look at what's reasonable. We have a meeting with Ted, tell him what we're thinking about doing, what we're thinking about proposing and asking for money. He looks at it and says, yep, that's reasonable, that's reasonable, that's reasonable. You may want to do this. Have you considered this? Then he endorses it, which he has endorsed the budget. We present it at the Board of Selectmen. Again, I can't recall that I've ever been challenged on anything. Once in a while, I know during some of the tough years, I may have asked for $3,000 for an increased budget and station renovations or station repairs, and that may have gotten cut. But by and large, it's always worked very well. It's always the recommendation between the fire chief and the town administrator has always basically been very good, and then it moves on to the advisory committee, and they look at it. If you make reasonable requests, you're going to get a reasonable return. I think the most important part and it's one of the reasons government in Hingham works so well is credibility. There has to be credibility between the town administrator and the Board of Selectmen. There has to be credibility between the department heads and the town administrator. I like to think I've been successful because when I go in, and Tom can weigh in on this, when I go in and ask for something, 99 times out of 100 I get it because of the credibility that's been established in all those areas, and people saying if he is asking for this, he needs it. So I know that's been Tom's, at least I think it's been his attitude.
That's absolutely true. And to Tom's question, I think that the communications and the respect that department heads with the town administrator leads the department heads in very good stead as far as their communications on budget items, either with the Board of Selectmen or the advisory committee.
I remember.
I can't recall, and I've done this with the chief for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
I can't recall a time when he's not feeling comfortable enough to do that on his own. The town administrator, I know, has been involved in the process, but he isn't at the table when he's discussing either capital or operating with the capital outlay committee or the advisory committee.
I remember once, I think you probably remember this too, Tom, once we, must have been 5 or 6 years ago, right after the beginning of the new fiscal year, July 2nd or July 3rd, it came to our attention that we needed to buy brand-new 12-lead cardiac monitors for the ambulances. And there were, I think there were $20,000 or $25,000 each. I needed 3 of them. And I'm thinking to myself, and I'm having a discussion with Deputy Fire Chief Olson, I said, you know, I really hate to go 3 days into the budget year in a brand new budget and go back to the town and say, I need $60,000. And I went to Ted, and Ted said, Mark, if it's that important and you need it, we will find the money. And we did. It was a brand new concept that had come out, not the 12-lead monitors, but it was a brand new piece of medical equipment we needed. It was important. And again, that's the relationship that Ted was able to do. He kind of chaired that. I didn't do it, he chaired it. He says, hey, the fire chief has identified this need. We recognize it's 1 week into the new budget year. We need to find him this money, and they did. I think you were part of that.
I think Karen was part of that, too.
Mm-hmm.
Just so my silence, being the second Tom, is not misinterpreted. I spent a number of years as chair of the Public Safety Committee of the Advisory Committee and had dealings with the chief in that regard, and I can attest to the truth of everything you say, as well as some other projects we've worked together on. I think from the perspective of advisory and personnel board, at least my experiences, the contribution that the town administrator position made was that you had town-wide numbers that you could rely on. You had a baseline of where we are, and you were not forced initially to start with wish lists from various departments that were hopeless to begin with for financial reasons, like crack about being told to go out and get zero raise contracts with your major unions, for example. And the town administrator's central role in the accuracy and credibility of the financial numbers, together with being able to present an overall perspective of the town's needs, making accommodations that this is a year in which the fire department has a particular need that we have to deal with, but just generally assuring equitable treatment and adequate knowledge to the elected, to the advisory on behalf of town meeting or the Board of Selectmen or others, about what realistically the town can afford in terms of the next year or so. It was a significant advantage over having to deal just isolated without an overview with each given department.
That's a very good point, because I remember about a year ago, I think it was right in this room, somebody who was either on the advisory committee or one of the former selectmen made a comment that really hit home with me and said that, you know, it's easier making budget decisions when there is no money, because there is no money. It's more difficult when there is money to spend. Then you have to decide, where do you spend it? And the town, that's a huge role that the town administrator, because he's been there for 4 or 5 years, he knows that this year this person got this, and that year we kind of favored the fire department. This year the DPW needed a couple of sweepers, so it was a comment that really hit home with me, and I think it's well taken, and that's the balance that the town administrator, especially if he's been there for a while, brings to the board. So.
But ultimately, in your judgment, it's clear, is it not, that however significant the role of the town administrator, budgets in Hingham get vetted at multiple levels: department head, town administrator, Board of Selectmen, advisory committee, and ultimately the floor of town meeting. Is there any question in your mind that the existence of a town administrator and the budgetary authority that he has had traditionally in any way impedes
No,
the
absolutely not.
ability of elected boards?
It enhances it because, again, he's going to say, and actually, although it's never happened to me, I mean, if the request is just so outlandish that it doesn't belong somewhere, then he's going to say, hey, don't even think about it. But no, he enhances it because he gives you that individual. This is something Charlie Costello was very good at, too. Charlie was very, very good. Both Charlie and Ted were very, very good at saying, do this, do that. This is the approach you want to take. I'll recommend that, or I won't recommend that. So it certainly makes my job easier to have Ted or whoever is sitting there. Even going back to when Kevin Pecos was for the short period of time that he was a town administrator, he was very good about doing that as well. So they've all contributed.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Chief, thanks.
Thanks a lot,
Really,
Chief.
by the way, you saved Dave Pace having to pay you a visit.
No, he came
Oh,
anyway.
he did come. Oh, okay, he came, okay.
It was a little, actually, after I had met with Dave yesterday, because I didn't quite know what his questions and where he was coming from, it gave me the opportunity to kind of think about it. My relationship under the Strong Chiefs law is totally different than anybody else, and the fire chief currently truly does run the fire department.
Right.
And so I had to kind of think about it, so I'm thank you for the opportunity.
Well, let me just say, and I know it sounds like I throw out compliments all the time, but you said you were very fortunate to work in Hingham, and we've been very fortunate to have you as our fire chief. I just want to say
Hear, hear.
that.
Thank you.
We worked with you a lot.
I always like to have the last say, and I remind the selectmen, the advisory committee, the planning board, all these people, when they come to me and say, hey, thank you for meeting with us, I always say to them, listen, I get paid for what I do. You people do it because you love doing it, and you're doing it for nothing. The credit belongs with the committees, not what the department is. We get paid for what we do. You guys do it because you love the community. And that's why Hingham is so great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Well, is there anyone else who would like to speak? Okay, I think we've heard from the public to the extent that we're going to tonight, and maybe we can just spend a moment and talk about our next meeting.
Nelson,
Yes.
may I?
Sure, Tom, absolutely.
I agree with you that we've heard what we're going to hear from the people who are present tonight. But anyone who tunes in or has tuned in or runs across this on a sleepless night at 2 a.m. on HCAM, if you're interested in communicating with the committee or with members of the committee, please do so. We invite whatever advice or contribution you might have. I assume you could communicate by email with the committee through Betty Foley. Can you give people what the address is for?
It's foleyb@hingham-ma.gov.
Okay, FOLEYB as in unbeatable, at Hingham-ma.gov. And my name's Tom Carey. I'm in the book. Give me a call or shoot me an email at careyt, C-A-R-E-Y-T, at bc.edu. And most of the rest of these people are in the book, too. And we won't duck your calls.
Good point, Tom. And just for the record, I'm Nelson Ross, and my email address is nelson18@comcast.net. Okay.
Well, I suggest you call Nelson or Tom.
That's my point. Please direct everything to Tom.
Okay. Shall we talk about our next meeting for a moment? I think we're going to be We're going to hear from Superintendent of Schools, Gallo. on the 17th. That's our next meeting, starting at 7 o'clock. And we will also be deliberating. And I think Karen is going to put together a list of topics.
Yes, as
Karen?
assigned, yes.
As assigned topics. And what I would suggest that each of us do is think about, for each topic, what are the alternatives that might be considered? Under hiring, for example, selectmen have all the authority. Selectmen make the final decision on department heads with a recommendation from the town administrator. Town administrator makes a decision, and the selectmen have a period of time during which they can veto it. So the town administrator really has no authority. So there are a lot of different alternatives, and I think if we can, in advance, look at each point and think about what are the alternatives and where do we come down on those various alternatives. That would expedite our process, I think. Does anyone else have any thoughts about how we might conduct that part of our process? Tom, makes sense?
No, it's fine.
Okay, well, I think we can, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous. Thanks, Betty.
Thank you, Betty.
And thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.